Running back situations that you need to watch. In fact, top sleeper situations coming through on the news wire and Sigmund Bloom.
Yeah.
We have to talk about what's potentially happening with the New York Jets, with, of course, Breece Hall there, but Michael Carter not going anywhere. Hall seen as the lead back is the latest news story. So are fantasy GMs getting the Jets situation right in their backfield?
Probably. I think that there's what are we looking at here? To take one Breece Hall is going to cost you these days probably a 4th round pick, maybe even a 3rd round pick, probably a 4th round pick. And there's a pretty big gap to Carter, who's going to be more like a 10th round pick. Both are justified in terms of the gap. The question is, do you think the Jets are going to unlock this offense? Really, it's what you think about Zach Wilson. But between the two, I would probably be more inclined to go with Carter, because Carter, we saw, is realizing his talents on an NFL field in a way that is more aligned with his best case scenarios as an NFL player. Breece Hall, more of an unknown. So while that span is correct, if Breece Hall does follow through and win that job, we also know between here and there, he could get hurt in the first week of training camp, miss a couple weeks of training camp with a hamstring, and Michael Carter could have a larger role to open the season. Or he may lose the coach's trust. He may not instill the coaches with trust. He's a rookie. So I think that Michael Carter has more upside at the ADP right now. But I think if things go as planned when the team took Breece Hall at the top of the 2nd round, he should earn that ADP, of course, with Zach Wilson as the big variable in this offense.
Yeah, the Michael Carter effect, Matt, is here because you have to think about Zach Wilson, wetting his pants and dumping it off to the running back in space. Like, the reports aren't great about Wilson. I don't think the projection should be great. I've mentioned it before, Matt. There is a power struggle going on right now between the front office and Robert Saleh, and it's Coach Saleh's 2nd year. So, we'll see how that goes. We'll see who wins that power struggle, but it all hinges on the play of Zach Wilson. Well, this running back conversation and the fantasy value therein hinges on that as well.
Yeah, and some teams just don't know how to team. So when we take a look at, when we take a look at the situation, I mean, it's expected that when you look at the Jets, that you're going to have dysfunction. Just like when you look at the Commanders, you're going to see dysfunction, at least in recent years. Maybe things will change each year. We hope they will. We hope the groundhog will come out and see his shadow, or, whatever it is. But when I take a look at this, certainly if you're just going to isolate it to Michael Carter or Breece Hall, I certainly understand Bloom's point of view from a value cost perspective, because you can have a lesser investment in Carter and look smart for the fact that you've got a capable player in a situation where the bigger question to me isn't even Zach Wilson. It's the Jets offensive line, because we know what Zach Wilson is when pressure arrives. And that's basically as bad or worse than Carson Wentz at dumping off the football and doing it, with good timing. Now, it could get better this year. Obviously, the big jump from year 1 to year 2 can happen. But to me, that offensive line is the bigger question of whether they're going to be able to support the type of things that Wilson does best when he's comfortable. And I just don't feel comfortable that they're going to keep their quarterback comfortable. So when I look at ADP overall and see where Michael Carter is, and I think I could get Kadarius Toney, I could get Mike Gesicki. Those are guys that I would be more interested in taking a chance on if I were looking for just a player overall. Now, if I'm looking at running back within that range, Ramondre Stevenson is coming up a little bit earlier. There's a little bit more upside with him, but the volatility is great because the New England Patriots have, like they do with every skill position other than quarterback, they have a huge casting call for the position. And then, hopefully you can figure out who's going to get the most touches in that backfield or that depth chart. But beyond that, to me, the most appealing player in this range of, 10 picks plus or minus of Michael Carter, I would say is Derek Carr, in McDaniel's offense. So, Derek Carr, Kadarius Toney, Kirk Cousins in a spread out offense. To me, that's when I'm looking at my quarterback, maybe my quarterback one if I'm playing a little bit later, waiting until later to get my first quarterback. And Carter would just be off my list entirely. And with Hall, I love his talent. I certainly think that he's capable of transcending his line in terms of talent to be able to produce, given that the New York Jets could have game scripts that would give him the chance to get volume. But I think that's that's a more remote possibility to say that his game scripts will be favorable enough to count on him as an every week starter this year, at least not anything more than a low end running back too.
Let's talk about the Patriots backfield, Bloom, just because you perked up when Matt was talking about Ramondre Stevenson. And I'm going to throw in Pierre Strong. If you're reading the camp reports, I go mini camp reports, but Pierre Strong could take James White's spot. Why did James White come back? Probably going to begin the season on the PUP list.
Right.
So there's Strong, there's Stevenson, there's Damian Harris. It's kind of a mess. And, we don't know who's calling plays.
Right. Matt Patricia and Joe Judge with Bill Belichick at center. And I wanted to tee up something for one Mr. Matt Waldman on this take, because Evan Lazar, I think, wrote a nice comprehensive piece. Basically, the indications are there is going to be a change in the Patriots offense, not just terminology, but there is going to be more outside zone. There's going to be more Shanahan-esque stuff in this offense. And that, to me, says Pierre Strong. That doesn't, that's not, I don't think, as explosive possibilities with Damian Harris. Sorry, let me rework this. The most explosive player in the backfield is Pierre Strong, and I think outside zone runs are where you can harness that explosiveness potentially if the scheme is installed well and run well. And now we're back to the classic Patriots backfield where 4 players could. J.J. Taylor's doing well with his opportunities. James White, as you mentioned, Cease, hip injury, might not be ready for week 1. Ramondre Stevenson also saying, I've been working on route running and third down work in the offseason. So really this is going to sort itself out. I think Damian Harris is the one constant as the early down back, as the goal line back, but he's not exactly the most durable. So there are possibilities here, but this is really going to take a few weeks into the season, I think, to see how it's going to shake out. With the biggest variable, Cease, as you point out, is this even going to be a good offense? Because it's great. We don't need Josh McDaniels. We're just going to have Joe Judge and Matt Patricia and Bill Belichick coach the offense. It may be brilliant. Belichick's a football encyclopedia, right? It may be something that is like when Bill Belichick scouts college wide receivers.
Yeah, and the Mac Jones hype train has been sickening this offseason, Matt, because every day it's like, Mac Jones is just the greatest ever. He's taken total control, and he was totally held back by the offense last year. Like, oh, okay, all right. We get it. You're pumping up your guy. But, Matt, this leads into that conversation about Strong. Stevenson, who if I remember correctly, Matt, I've always said he's a better receiver than people would give him credit for. So let's discuss this Patriots backfield and what there is to mine there.
Yeah, I mean, the Patriots are one of the toughest backfields historically to predict. So the thing for me is that I certainly saw the Pierre Strong analysis, the idea of, well, Belichick expressed a lot of admiration for the Shanahans and the Shanahan system, and that includes the outside zone, and Pierre Strong, who was probably the best fit for outside zone based on his speed, is the guy that you want to have in that situation. That's great. It does generate some interest, but at the same time, Bill Belichick's really, and Dante Scarnecchia and everyone else in this offense is very, very keen on assignment sound play. And rookies tend not to be assignment sound when the lights come on. And I would say, Bloom is right to say that Damian Harris is the most well-rounded back who is assignment sound. The back with the most upside in this offense is Ramondre Stevenson, because he is the most powerful runner. He has the best contact balance. He has good vision, excellent feet, and he was one of the top receivers in this class. A decent route runner for the college game with terrific ball tracking ability, soft hands, can really catch the ball from any angle and transition downhill well. Now, he's not, relative to Pierre Strong, he's a plotter, but he's fast enough. And the thing is with Strong is that while he sounds like a great match, the New England Patriots have been running a lot of gap and inside types of runs for a long time. They built this offensive line for that purpose. So how good are they going to be at transitioning to outside zone? I recall one Cecil Lammey having to cover the Broncos when they decided that they were going to try and put the cart before the horse with Devontae Booker, and change what 5 to 6 people were doing to try and accommodate one running back, and find out that that didn't work out so well. And that sometimes what ends up happening is they go back to the scheme that works. So trying outside zone, admiring the outside zone, having a back who might fit that because he doesn't really fit anything else quite well at this stage yet, but may have promise to do so. Historically, that doesn't work out extremely well unless that offensive line is unbelievable, because you look at the San Francisco 49ers, they're a great example. When you open a highway and you nickname your back Elijah Mitchell Drano because he hits the hole so hard and he's very fast. Well, those are the two things he does well. That's basically the only two things he does well. He's not a nuanced runner. But when you have the best tackle, best tight end, and best fullback as perimeter blockers in the league, and you can open up craters off the edge, which is not common in an NFL where you can go sideline to sideline with these, fast linebackers and safety hybrids. Your blocking has to be very strong for outside zone to work at a high level. So I think they're going to try it and experiment with it and see how that works this year. But I think at the end of the day, you're looking at Stevenson and Damian Harris having the best shot of being the 1-2 punch with the most fantasy production, and probably JJ Taylor or even Kevin Harris having a shot to do a little bit more as receivers in specialized situations. Harris is an underrated receiver, not a unbelievably fast guy, but very powerful in his own right. And as we've seen with Bill Belichick, everyone called LeGarrette Blount a plotter every year, and LeGarrette Blount was a 10th round pick that would realize running back 2 value pretty much every year, if not borderline running back 1 value. And part of that was because he could run to the perimeter. He had good cutback ability, he had patience, and he had great footwork, and he was fast enough. And I think for Belichick, fast enough is the key, whereas Pierre Strong, it's a nice idea to hope they can realize, but I think you've got to wait till at least 2023.
Yeah, Pierre Strong's like cryptocurrency. Like, all right, you're going to take a chance on it, and you're going to lose your ass. Sorry, Joe. Let's move on. And, I got something juicy about, there's people that I talk to, let's just say that, Bloom, that don't think Trey Lance is going to start. Because you mentioned the 49ers, and I was like, I got some bad news, because I love Trey Lance. So I got some news. That's for a different show, a different time. I'll just give you that little nugget. And of course, we'll get to training camp. We'll see what the kid looks like then. But let's move on from that and stick with the Vegas Raiders as our guy Jason, pot stoner degenerate, joining the show. Let's talk about Zamir White, because there's a couple of conversations going on in the Raiders backfield. It's so funny watching the Newswire, because it's like, it's going to be a committee. Well, yeah, we already know that, because it was supposed to be until Kenyon Drake got hurt last year. And now they've thrown Zamir White, who camp reports say might be the best of the 3. So not only is it a committee, it's a 3-headed committee, and Drake and Jacobs aren't going to be there next year. So as the season goes along, we could see more Zamir White, or hell, we might just see more Zamir White to start things off.
Right. I think, and remember, Josh Jacobs not practicing during OTA's mini camp, so that's just something to watch. it's indications are it's something physical, and very well could be cleared up before training camp starts. But if he starts camp on the PUP list or otherwise has some sort of nick bump problem early in training camp, that could be our path to value for Zamir White. Kenny Drake come back off of a broken ankle. Just again, watch these rehabs. Let's not automatically assume these players are going to get back to 100%. But see, the most important thing you bring out here is the new regime. And we always have to think about this in terms of what we read into the reveal, or what we read into these off-season pieces, or what we learn in training camp and the preseason. And we want to follow the money. We want to follow the investment. There's only one running back on the roster that the current new regime has invested in. And they know any good organization is looking during the draft, not at this year's depth chart, not at this year's roster, but at the roster 2 years down the line, 3 years down the line. So they like Zamir White. And I think this is another thing that we're going to need to think about here is we don't usually think of the Raiders as an elite fantasy offense. This was the topic this week on the couch with Andrew Erickson, catch a rising star. And it's just as simple sometimes as you want players attached to good offenses. Well, maybe we need to upgrade the Raiders into that good offense category, not just because they got Devontae Adams, not just because Josh McDaniels, but because they're in a division that's going to be playing a lot of teams that can also put points on the board, which should lead to game scripts that lead to more scoring. So all these things make you much more interested. There's a wide landscape of these running backs, right? Someone mentioned Tyrion Davis-Price, Tyler Algier, there's Damian Pierce, and so on, Isaiah Spiller. If you want to pick one to put a chip on, at least until we see Josh Jacobs and Kenyon Drake healthy, I think in an early best ball, I would want to look at Zamir White.
Matt, what do you think about Zamir White?
I think that, again, this is like the Micah Carter situation where Bloom wisely talks about, who's the player with probably the best value to return investment that's going to make you look smart and diminish your ability to make a big mistake on an early round investment. And White certainly is a good straight line runner with power. He plays about 20 pounds heavier than he actually is in terms of contact balance. He understands how to set up advantageous leverage. I think there's promise with him as a pass receiver. His pass protection is also promising, but it could take a year in terms of being assignment sound, as well as understanding where to get the angles correctly and initiate contact in the right positions to make sure that he's not basically taken for a ride into the quarterback. So there's some issues there with that. But when you look at this team overall, I have to agree that the Raiders are probably the team that I want to go after, because if you think about Derek Carr, he had 4,800 yards last year, which was one of the top 5 yardage producing efforts. And he did it without a primary receiver on the outside. And they haven't had one since Amari Cooper. You don't count Darren Waller. He's a tight end, or at least he's a move tight end or a receiver pretending to be a tight end, but he's not really the perimeter route runner you're looking for on the level traditionally of, a Justin Jefferson, Stephon Diggs, even, any DeAndre Hopkins, even someone who can win on timing routes to the outside against tight man-to-man coverage with a top corner. Hunter Renfrow, I think, is the most underrated receiver in drafts this year, and I just wrote about him. It's ridiculous that he's wide receiver 37 right now. I mean, that's worse than Tom Brady being low end of top 10 last year. That's how bad it is, because when you look at the distribution of that 4,800 yards that Derek Carr had, you're looking at him doing it with a bunch of receivers, because Henry Ruggs, wound up in jail and wasn't a well-rounded receiver. He was a deep threat, with Waller and him being banged up, Renfrow being basically a slot receiver who could occasionally do some work outside, but he's a matchup player in the slot, and then a bunch of guys who are basically also Rands, and Brian Edwards and Zay Jones. They're decent contributors, but not really fantasy starter material or NFL starter material at that primary level. So getting Davante Adams, what that does is that he's going to occupy 2 defenders on a regular basis or force coverage to roll over and use him as the primary focus. And what that does is it creates more advantageous matchups for Waller and Renfro, and it allows Derek Carr to consolidate his targets to probably 4, maybe 5 options as opposed to 7 options like they had last year. So you'll see fewer options having more yardage. And Hunter Renfro already had 1,000 yards last year. And you look at the fact that, you could probably still consolidate the yardage from last year. And if Carr does as well, and I expect that he will, and gets 4,800 yards this year, Renfro still has some additional yardage ceiling to get if you actually project Davante Adams as a top 15 threat, Darren Waller as a top 10 threat at his position. There's still room for Renfro there. And what that means is that with this offensive type that's going to be brought over like the Patriots, there's 2 options here that you often see McDaniels use. It's either going to be that 4th option is either going to be the running back or the second tight end. And if it were up to me, just from watching film, Foster Moreau needs to be freed soon to another team. He's a Pro Bowl caliber tight end sitting in the second role. I mean, he's that good at the catch point. He's that good as a blocker. He's that good as a route runner. But it's very possible that they roll with the running back as that James White complement or Danny Woodhead-esque type of complement. So in that case, it's more variable when you start looking at that running back as possibly the 4th fantasy option or 4th fantasy viable option. To me, you look at it 2 ways. Running backs, with Josh Jacobs, he may not be under contract next year, but knowing that he is a good player, and the reason he's probably not under contract is that he's just not worth the investment looking at the NFL landscape. But it doesn't mean that you don't run him into the ground and use him as much as possible this year. And if he gets hurt, you still have enough. You still have enough in the depth chart there to be able to get production out of a committee, with Kenyon Drake being the passing down back, and then you use Zamir White as the 2 down back. So Zamir White, the lower his ADP is, the better he is as an investment. If he starts to climb, I think that's when you might get into fool's gold territory, because with practices, we have to remember with running backs, Kyle Shanahan, who is very good at the Shanahans have always been very good at scheming backs to their system. And what they always tell you is we really don't know what we have in a running back in practice until live game action, because that's when the actual threat of contact and real decision making and front alignment changes and shifts, get into play, and you see real processing. Right now, you see guys running against air, and we can ask players, ask coaches and players what they think, and you're going to hear things like we hear with Travis Etienne, which I'm sure we'll touch on later in the show.
I'm sure we're going to get to that one later in this show. But Sigmund, it's time for us to talk a little Steelers, because Mateo Durant had a story come across the wire. So that us 3 we're gonna love talking about any sort of sleepers, or maybe backs that people aren't paying as much attention to. So Matt's chomping at the bit for this one, but Bloom, you're up to talk about the guy who may be the guy behind Najee Harris. You can talk handcuff if you want. And the Steelers offense is kind of it's an interesting. Wait till the preseason watch list, Bloom. I was thinking about that. I was like, "Oh, we're going to start preseason watch lists in about a month." Like, everybody, look out for that. But Mateo Durant is the guy they're saying could be the number 2 behind Najee Harris.
Yeah, the interesting thing here is the Steelers signed Durant to their largest UDFA contract in team history. It was a $15,000 signing bonus. So what that tells you is the Steelers don't exactly chase after UDFAs and dangle money, right? But there's something there. Jalen Warren is another name to think about there. What this all really points back to is Benny Snail is not the answer. Anthony McFarland is not the answer. They've wasted 4 two fourth-round picks on backs that honestly shouldn't even make the roster. So we want to find somebody else as that handcuff, the injury upside hedge for Najee Harris. So we absolutely need to be open to this. And this is one of the most interesting UDFA running back classes in a long time, right, guys? I mean, who are we going to be watching when camp opens? Abram Smith, Kennedy Brooks. There's the kid Chestnut with the Titans. That seems like a situation that's also ripe to have some uncertainty. There's Deshaun Corbin with the Giants. That's a situation. Matt Breida's not exactly entrenched there, even though Dable and company know him from their time together in Buffalo. So there's a lot of undrafted free agent running backs that maybe not could pull a James Robinson, but could at least put themselves on our radar seats for those fourth string running backs that we end up needing in December.
Right. Matt, you're smiling when I brought this one up. So let's get to it, buddy.
Well, keep looking at Steelers. Keep looking. That's probably what I'm going to say. But Mateo Durant is a nice special teams player. He's a good return specialist. He provides versatility, and he can catch the ball. So I can see why he could be the number 2 or the speculation for that, because the Steelers are going to be throwing the ball a lot, and they're going to need another check down receiver, in those game script situations if things go the way that we would expect with a rookie quarterback and a journeyman operating an offense with a weak offensive line. And you might want a guy who's quick through small holes, or on draw plays or on other plays where it's 3rd and 8, 3rd and 12, 3rd and 14, after they're not able to gain yardage early on in a play due to some pass incompletions or things like that. So your game scripts probably dictate that Mateo Durant is a potential option this year. But if you're looking for him to be like a fantasy caliber player, he's not even Mwelde Moore from way back in the day. I mean, you're looking at a player whose really best shot is special teams.
Mwelde Moore was Tulane, right?
I'm trying to remember.
Loved it.
Yeah, Mwelde was terrific, but I think that for this particular situation, the Steelers have just had a rough time with late round running backs or mid round running backs. When they go marquee, they do pretty well. But not since Willie.
Except for Rashard Mendenhall.
Yeah. And Rashard had his moments, but like you got
Morley.
and Willie worked out pretty well as a UDFA. But I'm talking recent history, because you look at McFarland, you look at McFarland and Snell, and Snell's like, if you combine both of those players, you would probably have a player who could back up Najee Harris and give you not much drop off from that. It'd be a great 1-2 punch. But unfortunately, one has the vision and the contact balance, and the other one has speed. And that's it, and if you can combine them, that'd be great. But you're not getting that in Mateo Durant right now. So it's he could be a nice camp story for the time being, but I think that you're looking at him as more of a return specialist, and they saw that, valued that, and knew that they could get some third down back. You're getting an Ogunbowale type of player.
It's funny that you bring up that style, Matt, because super quick, I'll toss it back to you super quick. I just think it's this time of year where that skill set, I went over my notes on Durant. They weren't extensive, to be sure, but I was like, okay, I don't mind his feet. He's very swift. He doesn't have that home run speed, but he can gash people because he's fairly disciplined with his footwork. And I had a special teams grade on him. I had an undrafted grade who's going to be a special teamer. So what you're saying matches that. And then I'm thinking about our conversation about the 49ers. I've talked to people on the staff about Trey Sermon. Like, Trey Sermon looks good till you have to make a decision, right? And that talent is still there. So dynasty wise, don't give up on Trey Sermon. The coaches like him, but Eli Mitchell was just the guy when it became real, right? Because we're talking about camp or mini camp and OTAs. Well, when it became real, Mitchell just showed he had it. So Durant is a nice story now, but I think it might just be the time of year that we're in based on his skill set. Maybe he could surprise everybody, but his skill set, I was like, this guy's a return guy.
Yeah, well, it's speed is the thing that stands out in camp, and it stands out with coaches in camp. It stands out with media in camp, because it's really the only thing that you can gauge is footwork and speed. You're not going to gauge decision making really well in that aspect. And again, we mentioned just real quick with the 49ers, they have always valued speed over nuance of decision making because of the outside zone. Tevin Coleman is not a nuanced decision maker, but they brought him in as a high price free agent. Rashawn, the best one who had the best combination was Raheem Mostert, but he always kept getting hurt. But they brought in Jerick McKinnon, same thing. Not a nuanced decision maker, hits a hole hard and fast. When you look at that team, the reason Deebo Samuel got most of the looks is they were like, we don't need a guy to think. We don't need a guy to process. We just need a guy to go where we tell him to go and hit it fast. And Trey Sermon's used to processing things with nuance, and running a lot of the coaching staff really are going to, when they look at a guy who looks at, who works more as an inside runner and is matched with an outside scheme. Well, to me, that's a disconnect between the GMs and scouts and the coaching staff. And it looks like that happens on a routine basis in San Francisco, where it seems like Kyle Shanahan seems to be fighting, with the people who do the grocery shopping and wants to go a different way.
Okay. All right. It is the Audible Live. Sigmund, you brought up you're going through some running backs. I was like, oh, that's next. Oh, that's next.
Right.
Oh, that's next.
Yeah.
I do want to pick your brain, though, because I saw you write about Benjamin on our newswire. And the Arizona backfield, like when they got Keontae Ingram, I think Matt and I did like a victory lap, right? So it was like, oh my God, that got Keontae. And then they signed Darrell Williams. I'm like, well, there goes that. All right. James Conner, we love him. He's going to get hurt about week 6. So here comes Darrell Williams. But Benjamin there as well. So let's talk about that Cardinals backfield. Again, assuming that your friend and mine, James Conner, will get banged up.
Yeah, he's not going to play 17 games. And especially this is important because chances are the games he's going to miss are going to be in December. They're going to be later in the season. He just wears down. That was the book, at least with the Steelers. That's why the Steelers didn't resign him. Although, where would the Steelers be if they'd resigned him at market value right now and used that first round pick that they use on Harris for something else? Probably in roughly the same place. Benjamin, we were pretty excited, staying in Arizona, played at Arizona State, 7th round pick, decent all-around back. And he did seem like a decent player to take the baton from Chase Edmonds. And here we are, Chase Edmonds got, at least in running backs terms, paid 2 years, $12 million. That's pretty good. And he's down in Miami now, speaking of the Shanahan system, the Shanahan tree. And Benjamin, unfortunately, at times, it seemed like he should have been activated or should have been getting touches over the last 2 years, and he wasn't. Guys like Jonathan Ward were getting on the field instead. So it's good to hear some positive buzz about him. They need him, but at the same time, you mentioned Ingram. I think even Ronnie Rivers there too. Again, this is one of those situations where I think training camp is going to decide this, and there isn't anybody who's safe on this roster after Conner and Williams, even though we need to know who that is because that player is likely to at least be a backup at some point this year.
All right, Matt, let's get to it because I remember talking to Herman Edwards about his guy, Benjamin, when he was down there. It's still weird to think Herman at Arizona State. But anyway, tremendous playmaker and the ball is the game and all the cliches that Herman Edwards comes up with. But some talent there. And I know in some deeper dynasty leagues, I'm invested in Benjamin. And again, now there's Keontae Ingram. Now there's Darrell Williams. It becomes a lot more interesting now and more obstacles for Benjamin. But the reports have been positive.
Sure, and that's good, and you hope for that because even though his progress hasn't been strong, it has been steady. You've heard talk about him getting more assignment sound or looking a little bit better each progressive year, but obviously not enough for them to stop investing in other running backs and bringing them in. He's stylistically, I've always made the quick little comparison to say that he's 90 proof LaShawn McCoy. In the sense that he, to an extent, you see flashes of ability where he can make the cutbacks. He has strong lateral agility. He has excellent short area quickness. He can catch the ball well. He tracks the ball well. And he was a good leak receiver, out of the backfield as an underneath option. But it's interesting because he was also paired with Jonathan Ward, who became a special teams stalwart for the Cardinals out of Western Michigan, who has 4.4 speed, doesn't have a lot of imagination as a runner, but a good downhill runner who might have had the best hands of any running back in that draft class, even though he was an undrafted free agent. So Ward actually got as much playing time, if not more playing time, than Eno Benjamin because he played special teams and Benjamin didn't. And when you look at this roster, really Benjamin's the most volatile player on this roster, because as a lead back, he could, if he was thrust into that situation, he could be productive as a lead scat back type. But considering that you have Keontae Ingram, who is more of a lead type of back, who's more explosive than Darrell Williams, he's probably, and he's also a player drafted by this regime. You're probably looking at him having the edge over Ingram unless he just falls apart in training camp. And Darrell Williams is more the hedge, as in we need a veteran who's assignment savvy, who can do all the things we need from him, so that we can use him as the lead back for Connor if Connor gets hurt, or if more, what they would probably prefer is to use him as kind of what Connor does in the passing game, and then be able to get 2-down play out of Ingram as, instead, because Ingram is probably the best athlete, and best well-rounded playmaker who has starter ability of the backups on this depth chart.
And today marks the day, Bloom, that Arch Manning chose Texas.
Yeah.
So your school, hook 'em horns.
Yeah.
Do you claim UT?
No.
You're like UT. You got.
Let me tell a little story. It's Syracuse. Okay. I mean, I grew up a fan of the Pitt Panthers, local fan, because you were either on the Pitt side or the Penn State side. There was no neutral,
Tucker, baby.
Right. And Syracuse, I have great memories attached to Syracuse football, Syracuse basketball. And that is my alma mater for rooting purposes. I'll say this. I went to law school at Texas. I could say a lot of things about the University of Texas at Austin Law School right now. I'll say this, though. 1997 was my first year of law school. And I was itinerant. You might have seen me walking around Austin barefoot at that time. And I remember I took a walk through the campus. I walked all the way from my apartment, which was in North Austin, all the way downtown through the campus. And it was the day of the Route 66 game. And when I got within earshot of the game that ended John Malkovich's career, basically, right? When I got within earshot of the stadium, I heard a UCLA touchdown. Then when I was next to the stadium, I heard another UCLA touchdown. And then I heard another UCLA touchdown before I got out of earshot of the stadium. And I enjoyed it because I saw Texas, especially watching the arc of Texas. They're like the kid who gets a brand new SUV on their 16th birthday. They've always gotten what they've wanted. And that's not enough in college football now. And it's actually a joy to see the revenge tour of players that end up at SMU or Texas Tech or these schools where Texas is saying, no, you're not good enough. We can have whoever we want and we don't want you, right? The players that they said, no, maybe not as a quarterback. Maybe you can go to Texas not as a quarterback, right? And they go on and have great success as a quarterback. So, no, and then Arch Manning here with the local. I really tried to go on to see him at Newman before, the run was over. But look, they can have Quinn Ewers, they can have Arch Manning, they can have all the quarterbacks. But I think this is a program that has coasted on reputation, and Vince Young brought them back to prominence. It was Vince Young, not Mac Brown, I think. And we'll see. That was a long answer, but you hit a nerve, Cease.
No, story time with Sigmund Bloom. I like it. I like it a lot. So Arch Manning going to Texas. Guys, I just happened to let everyone know I am close with Marshall Manning's coach. So y'all probably know his name.
Which one's his dad?
Peyton.
Okay.
Yeah. So Marshall, you got more Mannings coming up. So get ready. Marshall's playing tackle football for the first time this year. Hot Marshall Manning takes here on the Audible. See, this is what you get. If you're 8 years old and play football, we pay attention to you. Matt Waldman's probably writing you up. Just put your scouting report together. So there we go.
Who's his mom? Okay, so
there you go. Let's talk about the backfield situation in Atlanta. And Matt, you're down there in Georgia way. So let's talk about the Atlanta situation, because now Algier's there. Damian Williams, we just talked about Arizona with Darrell Williams, but Damian Williams is there to go along with Cordarrelle Patterson. And they're saying it's Algier and Patterson as the top two backs. Well, don't forget about Damian there too.
Yeah, I'd probably prefer Damian because I need to see proof that Algier is worth the price. Algier is such a nice story because he's the walk-on linebacker from BYU who turned into a running back and became very productive, and he has running back caliber size, and you'll hear the people who love Algier say, well, when he gets some momentum, he can really build up speed, and he was productive, and he was productive, and he was productive. And I really don't care about production at the college level, because really it's about, do you do things within your control to make positive plays? And when you start judging a player on that aspect of his play, you see that there are a lot of things that he leveraged that were out of his control that he did well. But when he had to take control of the situation, he had difficulty. He has difficulty really understanding angles of pursuit as a runner, which leads him to not making good cutback decisions or trying to bounce plays that he shouldn't, because he simply thinks that he's quicker and faster than he really is. And in the NFL, that's a very difficult thing to overcome, because you're dealing with tighter creases, with defenders who are more often in the backfield, defenders who are faster on the field. The defensive tackle on an NFL field, or nose tackle, is probably quicker and faster than some of the linebackers that you played against, in your conference. And there may be one or two players that you see, each week, who have that defensive tackle's athletic ability that you see in the NFL. So, Algier, while he can do a lot of things well, I think he's more of a special teams player that the Falcons just didn't make a great decision of drafting. Now, I've been wrong before. I'll be wrong again. And this could certainly be a player who turns out to be every bit worth the squeeze and the juice that they think he has. But Cordarrelle Patterson, to me, they want to run outside zone and a little bit more of that. You have Algier, who played in a zone type of system, but I think he was better matched as a gap player because of his difficulty with angles as a runner. Also, as a pass protector, he had difficulties gauging angles and was often a step or two late to the assignment that he could track ahead of time. He saw it, he just couldn't gauge it well enough to be in a position to win. And so I think that's going to show up a lot more in the NFL. And to me, Williams, this is something they may not see until early in the season. And then you'll see Williams as the guy that actually runs more of the zone plays, or they stick more exclusively to gap and use that 1-2 punch. But I think Williams is more of that Mike Davis type of player they had last year, who's reliable, who can block, who can catch in the flat, who can give you decent running skills. The only reason he's still not in Chicago is that Khalil Herbert was just that good. Yes. And just overtook it. Otherwise, he'd still probably be there backing up David Montgomery and being a quality asset for them when Montgomery gets hurt. And with Patterson is more that gap style player. So it's interesting because Algier's best chance, I wrote, was not the outside zone, but was to run more gap plays, because, even though he's not explosive, he is a determined runner. And if they can open enough creases where he doesn't have to gauge angles as refined of a manner as gap plays don't require, he might be able to, stick as a reserve in that situation, not just be a special teams guy. So for me, let other people draft Algier. Go after Damian Williams if you're in a deep league like 20-25 man rosters, and you can draft them somewhere between rounds 18 to 25, and get the discount on Williams and know that you have the backup by week 4, week 5.
We're getting a request, Bloom, that with your beautiful hair, you do analysis as Macho Man. You're more Rocky than you are Macho Man.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, I haven't worked on my Macho Man impression, but that the Macho Man snap into a Slim Jim, I can't do it. See, I got to work on it. But it's all about the hair vitamins. It's great. I mean,
you don't have enough rage to do Macho Man. You're too.
No, I don't.
You're a nice person.
No, I don't. I don't have it. I just think it's great. It's gotten to that point. We're getting old, right? I'm 47 in a few weeks, and I remember as a kid going to breakfast with my dad and my stepmom, and she would always have this little tin, and she would just put all these little supplements and things out. He's probably about my age when I started remembering this, and now we're to that age, and it works. It helps slow down the aging. Although aging is okay, like a fine wine.
There you go. What about the aging of the Falcons backfield to tie a bow on today's show?
It's the Falcons. I mean, there are certain backfields like Texans, Marlon Mack.
They may have Desmond Ridder starting, by the way. That's
right.
Another news item that's coming out. Like Ridder's going to beat out Mariota, which is like, okay, all right. We got
will they win a game this year?
Food.
Will they win a game this year? I don't think they will.
Right?
If they start Desmond.
Will they be
Ridder.
drafting CJ Stroud next year?
Right. Well,
I would. Yeah, I'd bet the under on 2 games won if Desmond Ridder starts the season.
And I think it's just as simple as this. When we look at offenses like the Texans, offenses like the Falcons, we're analyzing more for players to stay away from and not waste picks on. Not that something couldn't come out of those offenses, but I think our predictions are not going to be Kyle Pitts in the 3rd round. No thanks. Right? Drake London, if you want a rookie wide receiver to throw a dart at, probably not. And I think it applies to this backfield. As much as I love Cordarrelle Patterson, I don't think we're going to see him reprise the role where he was involved a lot as a receiver. So yeah, it's tough. Falcons fans, maybe they'll get Arch Manning.
It'll be a while. It'll be just a minute.
They'll be there waiting.
Yeah.
That's a wrap for today's program, everyone. It is the Audible Live. Make sure to do all those YouTube things, like, comment, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell so that you never miss a vid. Make sure that you head to footballguys.com, sign up for that free dailies newsletter. We're getting all this content from, as well, the stories that we aggregate and comment on from me and Sigmund and Joe Bryant. So check us out, footballguys.com. It's our handshake to you. It's our free daily newsletter. Top stories every day, right to your inbox. Takes written by me and Sigmund and Joe. So there you go. You can check out the great work of Matt Waldman as well, mattwaldman.com, mattwaldmanrsp.com, and of course, footballguys.com. He's Matt Waldman. You follow him on Twitter at Matt Waldman. He's officially awesome. He's Sigmund Bloom, tremendous at Sigmund Bloom, and Matt Cecil Lammey. The show is at the Audible. We appreciate you all. Thanks very much for watching. Thanks for listening. Stay tuned and stay frosty.
Sorry.